Shabbos Daf Nun can be divided into three sections. The first and the vast majority of the Daf discuss how it is possible to have a functionless muktzah object be made functional and therefore not muktzah on Shabbos. The Gemara will discuss this at length, and then this will segue into a discussion about what type of soap or shampoo one may use to wash his hands, his hair, or other surfaces on Shabbos, and when is it prohibited to use certain materials because they can cause hair to fall out, which would be forbidden on Shabbos. Then the Gemara towards the end of the daf goes back to the Mishnah, which discussed taking a pot out from a pile of wool shearings, and the Gemara will discuss putting the pot back in, and in general how you're allowed to put something into a hole if there's concern that you may move muktzah objects in the hole, or you may enlarge a hole, especially if it's a hole in the wall or a hole in the dirt floor. So let's begin. The concept of muktzah, again, is that you have an object which is functionless. If it's functionless at the beginning of Shabbos, it remains functionless. You're not allowed to use it the entire Shabbos, meaning you're not allowed to give it a function. You're also not allowed to move it at all. This daf is in the middle of a discussion as to how you can take a functionless object and decide before Shabbos that you want it to have a function. You can assign it a function. What you need to do to assign a function to a functionless object and make it not muktzah anymore. So we have a couple of examples of these which will be discussed on the daf. And there will be various different opinions. There's three general opinions in the Amoraim, and then the Gemara will discuss a few opinions of Tanaim, and the Gemara will attempt to line up the Tanaim and the Amoraim. And then the Gemara will have a situation in which you have an object which can only have some of the methods and not others. But for our intents, we have examples of muktzah objects which you may want to make not muktzah. You may want to assign a function. Would be, for example, shearings of wool. Now those aren't functional. You can't do anything with them on Shabbos. However, you may decide that you want them to be your insulators for your food, to hold in the heat around the pot. Okay, that would be a function. Can you assign that function to it before Shabbos? What would you have to do to assign that function so that it's not muktzah anymore? Another example would be a pile of branches. Now that's usually used for firewood. You can't use that on Shabbos, so they're muktzah. What if you want to use them as a chair? What would you have to do to make them to a chair before Shabbos? Another thing might be a cloth which you plan to use for a bandage. That could be a strip of wool, a strip of linen. You want to use it as a covering for a wound. Now, what would you have to do to give it that status before Shabbos? Dirt. You may want it to be used to cover up disgusting things on the floor, but dirt is muktzah. What would you have to do to make the dirt not muktzah before Shabbos so that then you could use it? So in our Gemara, we're going to have three basic types of things. One thing that you could do is you could assign it a function, either mentally or verbally, that this thing now has a permanent function. It is no longer what it used to be before. For example, if I take my wool shearings, I say this is no longer wool shearings that are going to be used to become thread and eventually a shirt. These wool shearings are insulators. Deciding it a function forever. So that might be one way of doing it. Another way of doing it might be that you do a physical change in the object. For example, the pile of wood, you bind it together with rope so that it's suitable as a chair. Okay, you did a physical change. A third thing you might do is actually use it. Let's say you took the pile of wood and you sat on it. So now I've actually put it into use in its new use. So would that change it? So these are the three basic approaches that we'll have. Assigning it a function permanently, or changing it physically, or putting it into use. So now let's see the opinions that we have here. First of all, we had in our Mishnah, the Mishnah had said that if you put shearings of wool on or around a pot of food to keep it warm on Shabbos, those shearings of wool are still muktzah. Now Rava goes ahead and Rava says that the shearings of wool around the food are not muktzah. So right away we have to figure out how do we fit this in with the Mishnah. So the first approach here is that Rava is referring to where you gave it a permanent assignment. These are permanent shearings of wool. That makes it not muktzah anymore. The Mishnah is talking about where you did not assign it. So now we see that Rava says if you assign it a permanent function, it's not muktzah anymore. Now, the Gemara then actually brings a statement of Rav and Amar of Yaakov, Amar of Asi ben Shaul, Amar Rabbi, who says this halacha. If you give it a permanent function, it's okay. Now Ravina has a different shot. Ravina says no. The wool that the Mishnah was talking about was special wool. It was from a warehouse that belongs to a person who deals in wool, and therefore it's set aside, it's not meant for use. That's why it's muktzah, even if you use it to insulate the pot. But Rava's case, you don't have to actually assign it. Once you actually use it, you actually put it to use as an insulator, it's not muktzah anymore. And the only time where using it doesn't take off the muktzah status is if it is a high level muktzah, like wool shearings that belong to a warehouse. Okay, now the Gemara brings a brisa to support that. Wool shearings that are in a warehouse do not become so easily removed from their muktzah status. Okay, now the Gemara goes on to another example. You have a bundle of sticks that you had in mind to use as firewood, but now you decide you want it to become a chair. So what do you have to do to make it into a chair that you could use it on Shabbos? So the Gemara first has a brisa. So what do you have to do? So we have the Tanakh says you have to do a physical change. You have to tie them up into a bundle so that it should be used for a chair. The tying is a physical change. Now Rav Shimon ben Gamliel says, no, you just have to decide, you have to assign it the function of chair. It has if you permanently intend to sit on them, even if you don't do an actual physical change, then that's enough. That would be similar to what Rava had said earlier. Now the Gemara brings a Machlokas Amoraim about this particular subject. The Gemara says that Rav says you have to tie them. Shmuel says you have to assign the use for them as a chair. And Rav Asi says you have to actually sit on them before Shabbos. You have to put it to use. And if you do that, then you don't have to tie them. You don't have to give it a permanent assignment. You don't have to do any of that. Now the Gemara says, okay, so Rav fits with the Tanakama. Shmuel fits with Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. They say exactly what they said. But Rav Asi, who says this new thing that you just put it to use, doesn't fit with any of these Tanaim here. So who does Rav Asi hold like? So the Gemara says they have another brisa and a different example. And Rav Asi is going in that brisa. What's the case there? It's talking about using combed out flax or combed out wool as a bandage to cover your wound. Now, the brisa over there says that if you take these things and you soak them in oil before Shabbos and you wrap them around with string, then they're functional as a bandage. That's a physical change that you've done to it. Then you're allowed to use it on a Shabbos. It's not muktzah, and you're even allowed to carry it because it's protecting the body, and anything which protects the body counts as clothing, and you're allowed to therefore wear it out on the street on Shabbos. It's not a problem of carrying, as opposed to if you didn't dip it in the oil, then it's still abrasive. It doesn't protect the body because it's just as rough on the wound as your clothing is, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to carry it. The brisa there continues and says that if you actually put it on the wound and you wore it before Shabbos, so that's enough. It's not muktzah anymore, and it counts as a wrapping. It is functional, and it's not carrying, and you don't have a problem. So here we clearly see, like Rav Asi, that as long as you put it to use, it's okay. You don't have to do the physical change, or you don't have to give it the assignment. The Gemara now finds another source to support Rav Asi, a Mishnah which seems to hold, like Rav Asi does, that if you put a muktzah object to use in a new function, it loses the muktzah state that it had before, and that's discussing straw. Straw was used to sleep on as a mattress, but what if you had the straw heaped up in a pile on your bed frame? You need to spread it out. So the Mishnah says, well, it's muktzah. You can't spread it with your hand, but you can lie down on it and shift it around with the body. That's a permitted way of moving muktzah in an indirect fashion. However, if the straw was already covered with a pillow or a sheet or a blanket and it was already used as a bed, so it's not muktzah. So you see clearly, holds like Rav Asi, that if you already used it, then it's not a problem anymore. Now the Gemara wants to know who's the Tanakama in the Mishnah, the one who had said that in order to make the branches into a chair, you have to do a physical change. You have to tie them up. So the Gemara says it's Rav Chanina ben Akiva, and we have the following story to prove that. Rav Dimi came and he quoted Zeiri, who said in the name of Rav Chanina that Rav Chanina ben Akiva once went to a certain place and he found a pile of date palm branches that were cut down for firewood, and he said to his students, go and mentally assign the use that these should be chairs. So he said that all you have to do is mentally assign it. But Zeiri continues and he says, now the reason he was able to do that was because it was either a wedding or it was a house of mourning, it was a base Avel. And that's why it was a special leniency here, but I don't know which one it was. I don't know if it was a wedding or a house of mourning. So the Gemara says, so you clearly see it. It's only because it was a special situation where people were too preoccupied to actually tie up the branches and do a physical change to make them into a chair. That's why it was permitted just to mentally assign a function. But In a normal situation, this Reb Chanina ben Akiva would hold like the Tanna Kama. He would be the Tanna Kama of our previous brisa that had said that what you should do is actually tie it up, to do a physical change to it. Okay, now the Gemara wants to know, according to all the opinions, you're supposed to do a physical change. What if it's a type of thing that you can't change? There are no physical changes that you could do for them that would make them more useful. A good example would be if you have earth. So earth was a very important thing to have around, a heap of sand. You needed to cover saliva that was on the floor or other unsightly filth, and these were things that you needed to have sand around for. And if you had sand for that purpose, it was useful. So what do you have to do to make sand? Sand is generally muktzah. It has no actual function. But if you want to use it, you want to have it on hand to use it for covering things on the floor. Remember, their floors were made out of earth. So what would you have to do to it? There isn't anything you could do to prepare earth for this function. So Gemara quotes an opinion. Here it's Rav Yehuda the Amira, who says you don't have to do anything because there's nothing you can do. You don't need to do anything. Let's see how the Gemara sets this up. The Gemara says, Rav Yehuda says you're allowed to bring a basket full of earth and leave it in your house, and it's not muktzah because you want to use it to cover things on Shabbos. Rav Zutra says you have to put it in the corner of the house. You have to leave it in a specific spot. If you just leave it in the middle of the house, people will step on it, then it just becomes like part of the ground. So that's not enough. So now the Gemara says, which Tana does this fit like? So the Gemara wants to say maybe something according to Shimon ben Gamliel says you don't have to do anything to it. You don't have to do a physical change. The Gemara says no. Rav Papa says could even be the one who say you have to do a physical change. This is different because there's nothing you can do to it. It doesn't need any physical change. Okay. Now the Gemara wants to say that maybe this very subject of something which can't be changed, is it enough to just assign a use? Now we want to say that's a machlokes Tanaim. The Gemara will quote a machlokes Tanaim. The first attempt to explain what the argument is about will make it a machlokes about this subject, and then the Gemara will reject it by offering two other explanations as to what the machlokes Tanaim is about, each of which will run into some trouble, and we'll finally end up with the third one. So what's the machlokes about? It's about shining silver kalim on Shabbos. Now you're allowed to shine it, the Mishnah says, with sand or some type of soap which is made from earth. You're not allowed to shine it with something called gartikon, which scrapes the silver and actually shines it. That's more of a shining. It's not so much washing. Okay, so that's one brayso. So the other one says you're not even allowed to use sand and the soap made from earth. So you see, machlokes, are you allowed to use the sand or the soap made from earth between two braisos? And what do they argue about? So the Gemara wants to say they must argue about this very thing. The sand and the earth are muktzah, and the machlokes is if you didn't do a physical change to it, do they become not muktzah? One of them holds it doesn't become muktzah because there's nothing you could do. It's just earth and sand. The other one says no, you have to do something to make it not a muktzah, even if there isn't really anything that you need to do, and therefore it is a machlokes about this very halacha. So the Gemara says, no, I'll tell you a different shot in the machlokes. The problem is that sand and soap sometimes scrape the silver also. They sometimes actually shine it, and that's forbidden. But you don't intend to actually scrape it. So the question is, it's a davar she'eino miskaven. It's something which you may end up doing a malacha that you don't intend to do. You just intend to wash it. You don't intend to scrape it and shine it. So it's a machlokes between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon, the Tanaim, whether a davar she'eino miskaven, an unintentional malacha, is permitted or not, and that's what these two brises are arguing about. So the Gemara says, hold on a second, but that means that you're telling me that the brisa that says that you're allowed to use sand and earth to clean your silver is Rabbi Shimon. So how come the next line in the brisa says that you're not allowed to use it to wash your hair because you may pull out your hair? But Rabbi Shimon clearly says you're allowed to use sand and earth to wash your hair because you may pull out hair, but it may not, and therefore it is a davar she'eino miskaven, and it's okay. So Gemara says, you're right, we'll reject that. We'll come up with a new explanation as to what these two brises who are arguing about whether or not you're allowed to use sand and earth to wash silver. We'll have another explanation. They're both agreeing with Rabbi Yehuda. And therefore, the problem over here is that you may scrape the silver, and that would be a problem. The machlokes between the two brises is there a possibility that you will scrape the silver and shine it? According to one, there is such a possibility, and therefore it's forbidden. According to the other one, it's definitely not going to happen, and therefore it is permitted. So Gemara says, not so fast. If this is Rabbi Yehuda, then I have another problem. The end of the brisa says you're allowed to use it to wash your hand, your face, and your feet. But according to Rabbi Yehuda, you may end up doing a malacha. If you wash your face, you may end up pulling out your beard hair. These soaps tend to remove hair. So how could you say that it's Rabbi Yehuda? So Gemara says, no, it really could be Rabbi Yehuda. Who is it referring to when it says you're allowed to wash your face with it? It's referring to either a woman or a child or a sis, somebody who never grew facial hair. So these people don't have any hair to pull out. So that's not a problem, and therefore really the pshat here is that it's a machlokes what Rabbi Yehuda holds. It's a machlokes within Rabbi Yehuda's opinion. Rabbi Yehuda would say that if a malacha incidentally happens, it would be forbidden. And the question over here is, could this washing silver cause the silver to be shined and scraped? Okay, now once we're on the subject over here of washing things with soap, washing the hands and the face, the Gemara discusses a number of other materials which you may use to wash your hands and face, and the question is, do they cause hair to be pulled out or not? So we have a couple of different things over here. So Rabbi Yehuda says you're allowed to use ground up brick even if you have a beard, because it's not going to pull out here. Rav Yosef says you're allowed to use the pulp of crushed sesames. It's not going to pull out here. Rav said you're allowed to use crushed pepper. Rav Shesha said you're allowed to use something called barda. What is barda? Rav Yosef said it's a mixture of 1/3 aloe, 1/3 hadassah, and 1/3 some type of purple flower. Rav Nechemia Bar Yosef says the mixture doesn't have to be a third, as long as the aloe is less than half, then the mixture is okay. Apparently the aloe is the agent which can make hair fall out. Okay, on a similar subject, the Gemara asks, are you allowed to take olives and smash them on a rock on Shabbos? Doing that would enable you to use it either as food or as a soap. So Gemara says this question was asked to Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes said you're not allowed to do it even during the week because it's wasting food. So Gemara says this seems not to fit with the halach of Shmuel. Shmuel says you're allowed to use bread for other things besides food. You're allowed to use it for soap and whatever else you might want to. So Gemara says no, bread you're allowed, olives you're not. The bread become ruined and they become disgusting if you use it for other things. Bread does not become disgusting, and therefore you're allowed to. Olives become disgusting, and therefore you wouldn't be allowed to use it. It would be disrespectful to food and ruining the food. Okay. The Gemara has an incident on this subject. The Gemara says that Amemar, Rashi, and Mazutra were sitting together on Shabbos, and somebody brought them some varda. So Amemar and Rashi washed with it, and Mazutra did not. So they said, well, Mazutra, don't you hold you're allowed to? We said that Rav Shesha said that you're allowed to wash with it on Shabbos. It doesn't pull out hair. So Gemara said, Rav Mordechai was there, and he said, no, Mazutra doesn't wash it for a different reason. He holds it it's forbidden to groom yourself excessively. He has a brisa that supports it. It says you're only allowed to scrape dirt off your body for health and not for beautification. Now, Amemar and Rashi disagreed. They washed with it because they said that you're supposed to keep yourself looking fine because it is covered for Hashem. The body is made b'tzelem elokim. Keeping it in beautiful condition also is honor for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Okay, now the Gemara goes back to the Mishnah. The Mishnah had at the end a machlokes between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah and the Chachamim. How you get the food that is in the pot, which is insulated, how do you get that food out? So Rabbi Elazar, the case is that you have the pot, which is set inside a box, and the walls of the box are lined with balls of wool to keep the pot warm. So Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah said you have to leave the pot in the box and tilt the whole thing to get the food out. The Chacham said no, you could take the pot out of the box and the wool and put it back in afterwards. So the Gemara says Rabbah said in the name of Rashi in the name of Rav that everybody agrees that if the wool falls into the hole, if you take the pot out and the wool falls in, that it's forbidden to put the pot back in. Everybody agrees to that. So the Gemara says, well then what's the machlokes? If everybody agrees that when the wool falls in, you're not allowed to put the pot back, so what are they arguing about? Obviously, if the wool didn't fall in, the hole is nice and neat, why would anybody say you can't put the pot back in? What's the issue there? It must be that the whole machlokes is where the wool fell in. Are you allowed to move it? Someone says, no, everybody agrees with the wool fell, you're not allowed to. The problem is, the argument is, do you have to not take the pot out because we're afraid that the wool shavings will fall in and then you'll end up moving them? Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says don't take the pot out in the first place. In case the hole gets messed up, you shouldn't come to move them aside because they're muktzah. Chachamim say, listen, if the hole gets messed up, you worry about it then, but you're allowed to take it out. There's no such gzeira. Okay, now the Gemara has a number of similar examples of halachas where you can't place something in a hole because you may move muktzah around in order to make the hole. So we have a plant called slikusta. This was a plant that smelled good. It was stored in a pot of earth, and it would bring the earth with the slikusta in it to very respectable individuals, and they would take it out, smell it, and stick it back into the soil. So the Gemara says you're only allowed to stick it back in if it was already put in and out at least once before Shabbos. That way you know that the hole is nicely formed, and you don't have to worry about moving the soil to put it in. Similarly, you're not allowed to stick a knife into the earth between rows of bricks unless it was put in and out of that hole already before Shabbos. Because if you're going to stick it in, then you're going to move the dirt to the side. Another halacha, you're allowed to keep a knife in a comb of reeds that's very tightly packed reeds. You don't have to worry that the knife will skin one of the reeds on the way. Now the Gemara has a proof against this. The Gemara has a Mishnah that says that you're allowed to hide a turnip or a radish under a grapevine, and there's no problem. Now, there are many different problems that could be here, which we'll get to them in a second. But one thing that it clearly says, you don't have to worry when you stick it in the earth that it's mukta because the hole is not well formed. So that clearly refutes what we said before, that you can't stick all these things in because they will cause you to move the mukta objects around to make a nice hole. Now, what are the problems with putting radishes under a grapevine? First of all, it's kilayim. If you view it as planting, it's kilayim because you're not allowed to plant vegetables and grapevines near each other. So that's not a problem because it's not kilayim. You're not planting it, you're just hiding it. You don't have to worry about muktzah, that you won't be able to get it out again as long as you leave some leaves attached to the radishes or the turnip that you could pull it out by. You don't have to worry about that. You don't have to worry about Shemitah. If it's Shemitah because you're not planting it, you don't have to worry about Meiser, meaning you don't have to consider when you take it out of the ground like you're harvesting it again in the first place. There you have to take Meiser again. It's not called re-harvested. It's just stored in the ground for safe keeping. So the Gemara says, you're right. This is indeed a refutation of what Rav Huna and Rav Shmuel had said. There's no problem putting something into a hole in the ground. We're not afraid you're going to come to move muktzah objects around.